Good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello. Welcome to Cutting Edge Day 2 at CogX. My name is Azeem Azhar, and I've been partly responsible for putting together both of the days. I am the founder of Exponential View, which is a newsletter that covers a lot of these topics from a perspective of both technology and society. And if you are not subscribed, URL is very straightforward. It's exponentialview.co. It's exponentialview.co, no M. It's an expensive domain name. I'm also an early stage investor with Kindred Capital, and I advise the Chief Technology Officer of Accenture on frontier technologies, and that's given me a remit to bring together this stage. Today, I've got a co-host who I'm going to ask to come up, Carina Namih. So, Carina, do you want to just introduce yourself briefly?
Absolutely. So I'm also an early stage investor. I'm a partner at Episode 1 Ventures, and we're a deep tech focused fund. And before that, I started, I suppose, what you would call a cutting edge company.
It was, yeah. Applying
AI to genetic data and helping pharma companies with designing better treatments.
Yeah. So today, we have a lot of talks. Actually, I lost count. So the first good news is the weather is much better than it was yesterday. It's a little bit cooler. The room got above 30 degrees centigrade yesterday, and it was, let's just say, a little biological by the end of the afternoon. But we're hoping it'll be more bearable today. And I thought we'd just maybe run through a few highlights of the day. You happy to do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you want to just talk about the sections that you're looking after, Carina?
For sure, yeah. So probably my highlight for the entire day is Sarah Gold from Projects by If, and she works on privacy by design. She's a fantastic designer who started her career at Apple and thinks very deeply about how we need to create systems from the ground up that have a user-centric, privacy-first approach without compromising usability.
Great.
How about you?
Yeah.
What's your top pick?
Well, my top pick, I don't want to ruin this, is the next talk. But also all the ones after that. But the next talk for me is a particularly special one with Hyan. And if you can make it through the whole day, we've got this incredible section where we talk about science and how science is going to be changed by machine learning and by AI. It starts at 12:10 with Zarvinder, and it runs through actually for a good 3 hours. And we have some of the world's experts who are looking at the future of biology and the future of chemistry. And just to round it off, the last talk by Anil Seth on what AI tells us about consciousness and what consciousness tells us about AI is really worth catching. When Anil spoke at TED, his talk was one of the most popular ever. It has more than 5 million views on YouTube, and he'll be closing the stage. Now, I've asked Carina to talk about deep tech for a few minutes. You'll do that, and then take us through the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I just thought I'd share some thoughts on some of the trends that I'm seeing in early stage venture investing in the UK. So although I grew up here, I had to move out to the US in 2013 in order to raise money for my business, because most of the VC funds in the UK were more focused on B2C businesses, and we're not yet excited about deep tech. But I think that has completely changed. I moved back to London a year ago, and I'm now in a VC fund where our focus is deep tech, and there are many others like us. And I think the reason why investors are starting to look at much more complex businesses like automated tomato pickers and a decentralized internet and voice natural language processing technology is that the early days of computing and the internet were like discovering a new continent. And we colonized the low-lying land first. We colonized the river deltas. We figured out how to do payments. We figured out how to connect people. We figured out how to create a social internet. And that's meant that we've ended up with incredible and massive companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon. But now, if you want to try and build a consumer internet business, you're dealing with these massive walled gardens with these enormous cities where you have to fight to find a tiny little chink of space, an alleyway, a niche where you can come up with an interesting business to fit into these sprawling metropolises of the low-lying land. And so for investors and for founders, we're now having to climb the hills. We're having to find interesting new land that was not obvious, that was not easy. And that means, to my mind, and I think for a lot of people in the tech scene, working with cutting-edge technologies. But it's very different when you're building a deep tech business and when you're investing in a deep tech business. You can't look at things like sales traction, because often you have to make the technology work before you can test it in the market. So at Helix Nano, we had this problem where you're trying to figure out whether you have product market fit, but you don't have a product yet. And that's something that we find very often with our founders at Episode 1. And part of what we try and teach them how to do is have an agile way of doing technology testing and commercial and consumer testing alongside in parallel, because otherwise it takes so long to do it in series. Now, if we look back historically at the big breakthroughs in technology, they've tended to come from 3 sources. The surprising one for many is the military. So the military spends vast sums of money on pushing out cutting-edge technology frontiers. And that's why countries like the US and Israel that have large military budgets are absolute leaders in technology development. Another area is universities. And I think this is a challenge in the UK, that we don't have a very positive spin-out culture in our academic environment, where often universities are taking upwards of 30% of an equity stake of a business before they've even got out of the gate. And finally, and most interestingly for me, massive corporate cash piles have historically led to incredible innovation. So some of you may have heard of Bell Labs and AT&T. So they basically had a monopoly on the telecom system in the US. And the antitrust legislators approached them to say, we need to break you up. This is ridiculous. You're a monopoly. And they struck a deal with the government where they agreed that they would actually open source a whole bunch of their patents outside of their core business. And that was actually one of the most productive deals that was struck between government and corporates in history. So much of the technology that we see today, from fiber optics to lasers to elements of the internet, come from that open sourcing and come from allowing that corporate cash pile to actually feed back into the ecosystem. So these are just some of the thoughts I wanted to share with you on what it actually takes to build ambitious new technology and to move on from the early days of the consumer internet and start tackling these much more ambitious challenges of building deep technology businesses. And there will, in fact, be a panel this afternoon where I'll be discussing with a couple of other investors some of the pros, cons, excitement, and challenges of investing in deep tech companies in more detail. But for now, I would like to introduce our next speaker. She is the director of Microsoft Research in Cambridge, and her name is Haiyang Zhang. And she's going to be speaking to us about her work in Cambridge and some of the playful systems that she's been designing to work with the most cutting-edge technologies of the day. Thanks.